All the time. Amen. So, it's been 20 years. 20 long years since Mel Gibson's The Passion came out. Can you believe that? It just doesn't seem like 20 years ago. When it came out, I remember we were preaching in Jacksonville, Illinois, and we took the youth group to go see it, and then we went to some coffee shops, and we all kind of decompressed, and we talked about it. But you know, 20 years ago, to go see The Passion, some churches were not happy about it. Not just because it was such a graphic portrayal, but this was a time when a lot of churches basically had a pact, an agreement not to see R-rated movies. And Mel Gibson tried hard to get a PG-13 rating because of that fact, right? So many people said, well, as a Christian, I could never see an R movie, and so the targeted audience, mainly believers, would have to reject the movie just based on the rating. How many people have seen The Passion? So pretty much everyone. If you remember the scene where Jesus is thrown down on the wooden cross and the Roman soldier has that railroad spike that he's driving in, did you know that's actually Mel Gibson's hand? Yeah. Interesting, useless trivia for him right here. Interesting tidbit, he felt so much culpability about the death of Jesus that he wanted to be the one in the film there. Kind of powerful when you think about it. And apparently next year in 2025 the sequel is coming out. It's The Passion, Resurrection. I think it's going to be about the church in the book of Acts. I'm not sure. I bring that up to ask a question of myself. Why do we tend to gloss over, ignore, neglect the brutality of the final hours of Jesus? Makes us uncomfortable, makes us feel more guilt. We don't like stuff like that. We like the image of Jesus with the lamb across his shoulder, with the blonde hair, the blue eyes, you know, the Swedish-looking Jesus of the movies. Right? We like that image. We like the idea of when I have a family member that's struggling, or I'm struggling, or we just want good fortune to come our way, whatever. We like the Jesus that we can go to as our advocate and kind of put in our request and hope that he smooths the path out before us, which I'm not saying is a bad thing, but it's not always the depth of maturity to think about the cotton candy stuff of Christianity and not consider some of the constructive violence that brought us to where we are today. So, John records in great detail the hours that lead up to the crucifixion with the kangaroo court system, the time before Pilate, the graphic details, and I think John does this for a reason. And that's what I want you to kind of hold in the back of your mind. What is John trying to accomplish? What is his goal? What is he trying to do when he shares this with us? I think when we look through any of the four Gospels, when we look through John's account, when we look at the hours before Pilate, when we look at the graphic nature of the violence and the brutality, if it doesn't make us a little bit uncomfortable, and who doesn't want to go to church if you may feel uncomfortable, right? Whether it's here at church or at home, if it doesn't make us feel a little bit uncomfortable, it doesn't make us feel some culpability, then I think we need a heart heart check. I really do. I think if we don't think about it, there's a heart problem. I remember when Tam and I were new believers, we were at the church in Naperville, and this guy got up and he gave this communion talk, and I'll never forget it. He goes into all this detail. He was at the lake, they were boating, and someone's Labrador retriever, this beautiful golden long-haired Labrador retriever, fell out of the boat, and instead of letting it back in the boat, the guy takes his oar and he beats the dog over the head, and he goes and all sorts, and everyone's getting all worked up, right? And of course, you know where this is going because you already hear me talking about the passion. And the guy's point was, you cry over this dog who gets beat with an oar, and do you really, what do you think about when you think about communion and all that Jesus went through? I'll never forget that. It was kind of like a shocking idea. But if we don't oftentimes pause to meditate and think about it and be touched emotionally, we've got some personal work. So John has a purpose. Now, doggone it. I did it again. I forgot to put the text up on there. Golly. Old age, I'm telling you what. I walk into a room and I forget why I'm in there. Well, again, you'll have to get on your phone, as long as it's not Facebook, or open a real Bible. I'm in John 19, right? Now, what you may or may not know about what's happening here is, John says, then Pilate took Jesus and flogged him, and the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put on his head. From the Greek, Pilate's not the actual one flogging him. He's having him flogged. What you may not know, in this time period, they had 3 different levels of flogging. That they used different methods and different tools of torture device to flog them, but based on the crime, they increased the intensity. One might just kind of bruise your pride, one could take your life. In fact, they had a saying back then, 39 lashes, because why? They believed on the 40th lash it could be fatal. And there probably were a lot of people in the ancient world that were killed by being beaten. One of the devices that they used was basically like a T-ball bat in length, and it had cords tied to it, 3 cords, and at the end of the cords of leather, they tied in broken bits of bone and metal so that when they lashed you, it ripped your skin off. So when we hear that Jesus is flogged, this isn't like 1968 kid on campus at Berkeley sitting in to, protest the Vietnam War, and some police kind of work him up and throw him in the back of the squad car. And the next day the kid's back in class. This is the type of flogging that you don't really come back from. To say it was a deterrent to crime would probably be an understatement. Like if you knew, hey, if I do this, I'm going to receive that. But historians said with these 3 levels of flogging, that the one that Jesus received is the harshest and the deadliest of them all. So it would be really hard to walk after this. You got to imagine coming around your shoulder, hitting you, maybe hitting you in the face. The intensity of it, the violence, the brutality of it would be nauseating to watch. And it's so amazing that Jesus, as an innocent individual, doesn't react like I would. I'm not a small guy. You push me around, you push the wrong buttons, I feel like I'm going to push back. I think that's human nature. I think that's natural. And for Jesus to be able to resist that temptation, to exert the power and the strength of, Jesus is the one who spoke the universe into existence. I mean, yes, he turned the water into wine. I don't like that miracle, right? Yes, he feeds the 5,000. I don't like that miracle, but he is all And to sit there and to take that type of physical abuse and emotional abuse. Look at verse 2. And the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head and arrayed him in a purple robe. So, I did a little research on these thorns, and apparently they come from some type of palm, and they're 12 inches long. See, I'm always thinking like thorns off of a rose, you know, they're like half inch, which hurt, right? You know, or thorns like in a briar patch, 12 inches. Now, I want you to stop and just think how crazy the whole thing seems. You're a paid soldier, but your detail is torture. You're here in Jerusalem, which you don't want to be there. The Romans hated Jerusalem. That's just like the old joke, you know, back in the 70s. You're going to, in the military, your duty's going to be up in Alaska, right? You know you've messed up and they're going to ship you up there, right? This is a bad detail. The soldiers don't want to be there. It's no fun. They don't like the people. They don't get along. There are always threats of upheaval and riots. That's why the Romans don't like Jerusalem. It's a volatile area. So you're a soldier. You're in charge of Jesus, and you say, hey, they're calling this guy a king. Let's make a crown. You walk over delicately. You're breaking off vines with thorns, and you methodically sit down. You don't weave a crown of thorns in 5 minutes. I get mentally exhausted trying to think through stuff that would be malicious. How the guy could sit there. You know, what does he use? Does he use a stump to form it around? And then he takes it, and do you think he delicately, here, Jesus, don't move now. Let me just kind of rest this. They start striking him. The word in the Greek is rapido, something like rapido. It's they come up to him, "Hail, King of the Jews," and they struck him. Oh, rapsamata. I think that's where we get the word "wrap you on the side of the head" from. I don't know. I looked that word up. It's not a gentle, and it's repeated. They're not just hitting him once. Bang. Bang. The thorns. Bam. He's already been flogged. So everything is tender. And over and over. It's sadistic. They had a game, these soldiers did, called Mock King. And Jesus isn't the only one that they dressed up and tried to make a fool out of. It was a game for these soldiers. I didn't know that before this week. I never read that before. That they would put fake scepters in the hands of these other people and oh yes, hail the king, and then beat the living hell out of them. Just with everything they had. Sadistic, cruel. And of course, I don't even have to ask the question, you already know the answer. What's the purpose of the escalation of the cruelty and the torture? Just to further humiliate him. They're going to kill him. They don't have to go through all of the extra steps. The end result is they're going to kill him, right? They're going to beat him and they're going to kill him. You don't have to degrade someone like that. You don't have to mock someone like that. You don't have to, unless the goal is humiliation. So I want you to think about that for a moment. We like the warm, fuzzy Jesus. But to think about not just the physical excruciation, but the emotional abuse. To sit there and to take it, complete opposite of what they're doing here. His response, or his reaction, is completely the opposite of the enforcers and the accusers. And John is recording this. Again, he's got a purpose here. He wants us to see what's going on. So Pilate, trying desperately to stay in good graces with Rome, trying desperately to keep down revolts, because that's why he is, I don't know if you know this, that's why he's sent into that region, to keep down revolts. It's hard to get tax money out and everybody's in there killing each other, right? So, again, we see this failed attempt at compromise. And I want you to read between the lines here. Look at verse 3. They came up, "Hail, King of the Jews," right? They strike him with their hands over and over. Verse 4, Pilate went out again. So it's another failed attempt at compromise. And he said to them, "See, I bring him out to you that you may know that I find no guilt in him." He's trying to expose the absurdity of their claims. Right? The Jewish leaders are upset. They're envious. They're jealous of his influence. They don't like the threat to their system that Jesus proposes. So, we gotta have him killed. We gotta have him killed, right? And Pilate's like, "I've interrogated him. I've flogged him. We beat him. We mocked him. Look, come on. Let's all grow up here. Right? You had your licks in. You had your fun. Let's call it a day. All right? Even Stephen, you wanted the guy beat down. Beat him down. Let's just keep moving on." So Jesus came out wearing a crown of thorns, verse 5, the purple robe, right? Very expensive. I didn't realize this. For the longest time, I always thought, it's kind of like you go to TJ Maxx and get a purple. Purple was a dye that back then only came from shellfish. It's a very expensive dye, reserved for very wealthy royal people. And so to put on this show is a presentation here. Pilate said, "Behold," who's got a Bible open? You got a Bible open. Tell us. What does he say? "Behold, King of the Jews. Behold, Master of the universe." What's he say?
Behold the man.
Behold the man. You're bringing Jesus to me because he's accused of trying to be your king. I'm not going to call him a king. Do you see what Pilate's doing here? He's trying to hone in on reality. The reality that he sees. He's just a man. He's just a carpenter. He's nobody. I can't understand why you guys are all in this uproar. Behold the man. And when the chief priest, verse 6, and the officers saw him, they cried out, "Crucify! Crucify!" And Pilate said to them, "Take it yourselves and crucify him. I find no guilt." Pilate is doing everything he can to back out of this situation. But it's about to get even worse for Pilate. He's just trying to be a good politician. When the chief priests heard it, "Crucify, crucify, take him yourself," the Jews answered, look at verse 7. "We have a law. According to that law, he ought to die because he made himself the Son of Man." When Pilate heard this statement, he was even more afraid. He wasn't afraid before. The fear that he has is amplified. Why? He's superstitious. In the Roman theology, many of the gods would come down and procreate with human women and make demigods. In Pilate's worldview, it's very believable that Jesus could be one of these offspring of the Roman gods. And so his superstition kicks in. Whoa, you know what the gods do when you offend them back then, right? That's when all the plagues come in. That's when the earthquakes come in, right? That's when bad things happen to you. Now I was like, whoa, I might have stepped over the line here. Now Pilate is terrified. And the irony of his fear, first of all, his recognition that Jesus is innocent. Okay, I want to release him on that. I can't. Now he's afraid he might really be a God. I don't want to have any problem. But how do they squeeze him? This is so ironic in the story, right? So, when Pilate heard the statement, he was more afraid. He enters the headquarters, says to Jesus, "Where are you from?" Jesus gives no answer. Pilate says, "You're not going to speak to me? Do you not know I have authority to release you and authority to crucify you?" Jesus says, "Well, you don't have any authority over me at all unless it's been given you from above. Therefore, he who delivered me over you has the greater sin." He's not talking about Judas. He's talking about Caiaphas and the high priests. From then on, verse 12, Pilate sought to release him, but the Jews cried out, "If you release this man, you're not Caesar's friend. Everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar's." Now they got him. You want to release him because he's innocent? You want to get him out of your hair because maybe he is a deity? Your social standing, your political position. Now we're going to turn the screws. If you let it go, you're agreeing that he is a king, and you're not a friend of Caesar's. That's pretty much how most manipulation and coercion works. You find where the person's weak spot is, and then you just... And they knew they had it. When Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out, sat down on the judgment seat at a place called the Stone Pavement, in Aramaic, Gabbatha. So it's the stone where judgment takes place. So envision a courtyard of a circumference, probably not much bigger than this room. And Pilate is seated kind of like on a throne. But the way historians report it is he's elevated above everyone else. So he can see the whole group. And at this point, it's allowable for Jesus to plead for his innocence or to plead for amnesty or to plead for pardon or mercy. And he doesn't. It's also a time where Jesus' accusers are allowed to put more fuel onto the fire. So we don't know all that went on. But we know Pilate sits seated above the crowd, frustrated he couldn't come up with a compromise, concerned that he might really be getting in trouble with the gods, but more worried about his position with Rome. So he says, "Behold your king." He went from "behold the man" to, okay, "behold your king." They cried out, "Away with him, crucify him." Pilate said, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." So they had a prayer list, 18 benedictions that they prayed every day as Jewish men. One of them was, "Thank you, Creator of the universe, I wasn't born a woman." But in that daily prayer, they also prayed that, in that prayer was a phrase, "God, you are our king, our only king." Look at the hypocrisy. Look at the throwing out everything we believe to be true. "We have no king but Caesar." So he delivered them over to be crucified. What historians tell us is that at this same exact moment in chronology, time-wise, time of the day, as this statement is being made, it's the same time in the temple that the priests are sacrificing the Passover lambs. This is week 22 of the Passover. Think about the significance of that. As Jesus is being delivered to be crucified, it's the same exact time that the Passover lambs are being sacrificed. Unpreserved. Unprovoked, I mean. The precursor to the crucifixion. Floggings, beatings, humiliations. And it it comes from fear. It comes from envy. It comes from a religion system where these people value their position of power more than the power of God to work. And listen to me clearly. Jesus remains vulnerable. He is beaten physically, but he's not beaten. They beat him, but he's not beat. He's not conquered. It's part of God's plan. And that is amazing to me. That the shedding of the blood begins in the beating, the flogging, and the humiliation. And John wants us to connect to this story. I start off with saying John has a reason why he goes into the graphic details that he unfolds for us. And I think part of the reason, part of the purpose is he wants us to consider all of the circumstances that go towards the granting of our forgiveness, the connection, the context. Why? Why does John put the effort into this? He didn't have to. He didn't have to put the details. He didn't have to do all that. Why? I think without meditating on the intensity and the extreme price of being paid to grant our forgiveness, I think we risk losing the appreciation of what God did for us. We tend to take it for granted, feel entitled. Well, he loves me, he's got to forgive me. I think there's a reason why we look at this. Number one, I think it lends towards more appreciation. But number two, maybe more importantly, I don't know, if you really stop and think about this story, you really absorb it, it provides, I think, an immense amount of motivation to be more dedicated to Jesus. I don't know how we can not find our motivation and dedication increasing when you think about the ultimate price he's paying here. And it's not just like, you know, the old cliche of I'm in the bunker and someone throws a grenade in and I jump on it to die for the platoon. You know, that's a one and done. This is an hour long on top of hour long. I mean, we're looking at like 6 hours here. The weaving of the crown, the flogging, the beating, the emotional turmoil, on and on. I started off talking about Mel Gibson's movie The Passion. And you probably know this. If not, it's a good reminder. Passion doesn't mean I'm all excited about it. Passion doesn't mean I just romanticize it. I got passionate about grilling, right? Oh man, you're really into grilling. Or I'm passionate about my grandchildren. Passion literally means suffering. You know what the word compassion means? You know, I have compassion for somebody. That means to suffer alongside that person. I'm trying to say all this to say the event that leads up to the crucifixion was not painless for Jesus. Not physically, not mentally, not emotionally. Was any of it painless. It was punishing. It was ruthless. And it's just the beginning of the real misery. Lord willing, next week we'll look at the crucifixion. But I just want you to think about right now how amazing God's love is and how Jesus, completely innocent, could suffer through that for you